Like many big cities, Atlanta policymakers consider how to ensure sustainable growth. This involves delicate balancing among different stakeholders in light of limited budgets and the evolving demands of an increasingly globalized world. For instance, the Greater Atlanta metro area grapples with traffic, growth patterns, zoning regulations, public transit options, and tax policies. Each of these impacts the choices that persons and businesses make. Each of these has important impacts on carbon footprints. Each of these involves complex trade-offs. Devoting more public funds to public transit, for instance, can come at the expense of roads or education or updating water systems and so much else. Atlanta is a regional hub in a wider system that depends on the reliable generation and provision of energy. This energy improves people's standards of living and their access to crucial opportunities. Pushing for more sustainable futures is commendable, but what it means to be sustainable is itself disputable. Policies always involve trade-offs. Reasonable people disagree about how best to make these choices. For instance, some people think the city should take a stand for sustainability and require denser housing, increase taxes on fuel, forbid the use of natural gas in new construction, and they question how it is that the state should subsidize certain agricultural practices that have big carbon footprints. There are others who think that access to reasonably priced food is a basic human right. Whether the city should subsidize or tax certain choices because of climate concerns touches on important issues about political legitimacy, the fallibility of political processes, and the challenges of legislating for diverse communities. Philosophy can help make clear what are the stakes and how to frame them.
Cities in general, and Atlanta particularly, are prime examples of hubs where the interactions underlying global climate change intersect and are amplified. Atlanta is also a prime example where many of the changes and the solutions needed to lessen the impact of climate change will have to be deployed. For instance, there are efforts to reduce the urban density and the net emissions from transportation, such as the expansion of the public transit system, MARTA. But then some consideration have to be taken. For instance, we have to examine the stakeholders' response to these efforts and the public response to such an expansion.
Yes, one of the issues we are seeing in Atlanta is something scholars call climate gentrification. It is also known as green gentrification, and this occurs when projects that are meant to make cities more sustainable, like green space and buffer zones, end up increasing property values in the area and leading to problems with housing affordability for local residents. An example of climate gentrification in Atlanta is what has happened in the neighborhood of Peoplestown, which is just southeast of downtown Atlanta. Peoplestown has had a major problem with flooding because, in an example of environmental racism, the sewage system in this majority Black neighborhood was never built right and was falling apart. And so, to solve the flooding problem, the city wanted to build a water retention pond, but there were houses in the way. So they used their power of eminent domain to tell people they had to move. And some residents said no, and they fought with the city for a decade to be able to stay in their homes. Now, recently, they settled with the city and the plans for the pond are moving forward. So, although it seems to be resolved for those families, we still need to ask, what happens next? With the loss of that affordable housing and the new pond, property values in the neighborhood are probably going to go up unless we put protections in place. We also see this in other projects that are supposed to promote sustainability in Atlanta, like the Beltline, where the property values around it have skyrocketed. So green space is wonderful, but it can't come at the expense of affordable housing. These examples demonstrate just how challenging it will be to find equitable solutions to climate change. We have to keep a close eye on environmental justice. And the best way to do that is to have the people most impacted by climate change lead the way to the solutions.
The most well-known impacts of climate change is rising temperatures, and Metro Atlanta is not an exception in this case. Past studies indicated an increase in Atlanta's average temperature in all seasons, which may expose our population to heat waves and the famous heat island effect. We know that extreme heat is very dangerous and is one of the leading causes of weather-related deaths in the United States. Together with heat waves, other Metro Atlanta's top climate hazards are projected to increase their intensity by 2050 due to climate change, such as precipitation, warming, water deficit, and drought events.
You may have heard Atlanta referred to as the city in the forest because we have more tree coverage than most other metropolitan areas. Almost half of Metro Atlanta is covered in trees, and incredibly, we even have some old-growth forests, which means they have been standing undisturbed and uncut by humans for at least 120 years. These trees don't just make our city beautiful, but they're actively working to mitigate the effects of a changing climate. Trees literally grab carbon from the atmosphere and use it to add growth to their trunks and branches, keeping it there for hundreds of years and out of the atmosphere. They're our most environmentally friendly and cost-effective tool at removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and the more we have, the better off we are. In addition, they provide shade, which is super important as the temperature warms, not only because they keep us comfortable outside, but they reduce the need for air conditioning in houses and buildings, reducing utility bills and use of fossil fuels. All this said, the reputation of Atlanta as city in the forest is under threat as development of our city continues. Old neighborhood trees are cleared for new housing developments. Forests are being cleared for warehouses, commercial properties, and controversially, a huge new police training facility. Fortunately, there are many local and statewide organizations working to protect Atlanta's existing trees as well as add more. And you can get involved in many of these organizations through volunteer work, advocacy, internships, and other job opportunities. Trees Atlanta is the organization that most people are familiar with, but smaller organizations such as South River Forest Coalition and Eco Addendum also provide opportunities for folks to get involved.
Proctor Creek is a prime example of an environmental justice issue in Atlanta that people are working hard to fix. Proctor Creek got more public attention when Mercedes-Benz Stadium was built in the neighborhood. In the early 1900s, Atlanta built sewage infrastructure and did not build enough infrastructure to take care of the largely African American community downstream from the high points of the city in Proctor Creek. In one of the earliest examples of the environmental justice movement, neighbors and allies rallied to have the infrastructure fixed for Proctor Creek, but they were unsuccessful with getting Atlanta leaders to invest what needed to be invested. Sewers combined with stormwater drainage result in raw sewage pouring into the downstream community of Proctor Creek whenever rainwater overwhelmed the infrastructure. As more impervious surfaces were built upstream, and climate change has changed the weather patterns, the problems have magnified. And the large amounts of rain in short periods of time due to climate change have led to more raw sewage flooding into Proctor Creek. This is a great example of how infrastructure affects how things work and how we can change it for the better.